You're listening to Little Green Cheese, episode 20. Welcome back. I'm Gavin Weber, and this podcast is where you can learn about cheese making at home. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about maturing or aging your cheese at home. Now, let me just read a bit from my book, Keep Calm and Make Cheese. And this is from the aging section. So when we're talking about aging, this is typically after the cheese is taken out of the cheese press. So after the cheese has been air dried and you can touch it without feeling too much moisture. So it really refers to hard cheeses and mold ripened cheeses. So when you age these type of cheeses, you'll need to be able to keep the temperature of the cheese in the specific range stated in the recipe that you can find in your book. This ranges from around 7 degrees Celsius to 13 degrees Celsius, which is around 44 to 55 Fahrenheit. And the relative humidity can range between 75 to 95%. Now, this can be difficult to achieve in a normal fridge or refrigerator, which is usually set to around 4 degrees Celsius so the food doesn't go off. Now, as cheese is a living organism, it doesn't really matter if it goes off, because it doesn't. It just grows extra mold and all those other sort of goodies and aging things that happen to cheese. Now, some of the solutions that you may have, or it depends on where you live, you could have a basement or a cold place in your home that stays cool, and it can be around the correct temperature, and you can often ripen your cheeses or age your cheeses without too many problems. Now, basements are known to be quite humid, so the relative humidity is probably around 80%, so that would be okay. Now, if you wax your cheese or vac pack it, then you'll have no problems there anyway. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, cheeses have obviously been aged in caves for many, many hundreds, maybe even thousands of years with pretty good results. So I think your basement would be pretty good if you had one. Not a lot of homes here in Australia that have basements. So if you live in warmer climates like I do, you need some form of artificial cooling. Now, what you can do, there's a couple of options there, maybe 3 or 4. You can get a wine fridge. Now, I've been using a wine fridge since I started making cheese. Now, it's fine in winter because it has a small, it's not true refrigeration. It's like a heat exchanger. It's a Peltier effect, I think it's called. And basically, it sucks the cool air from outside and brings it into the fridge, and that's how it works. It's not like proper refrigeration where it uses compressed gas to transfer heat and make the inside of your fridge cold. Now, unfortunately, at higher temperatures, and I mean anything over 30 degrees Celsius, wine fridges don't work ideally. The temperatures don't stay true to what you set them at. So that's a bit of a problem. If you live in a cooler climate, then a wine fridge, no problems at all. You could use that. You place to keep the humidity up, you put a bowl of water in the bottom of the wine fridge. Now, because it's become very hot here in Australia, what I am looking for now is a small bar fridge, whether it be second-hand or a cheaper brand new one. And what I'm going to do is connect it to an external thermometer. And I was sent a link by one of my listeners / readers. Cole, if you're out there, thanks very much for the link. It's a link to an external, it's for reptiles, would you believe? So it's got a normal thermometer probe, it's got a temperature probe that you put inside where you're going to keep your reptile, and you plug in a heating lamp straight into the thermometer, you set the temperature and plug it into the wall. Now, what you can also do, instead of using it to heat reptiles, you can use it to cool your fridge or heat up your fridge, because your normal refrigerator, as I said before, it operates at 4 degrees Celsius. Now, I want to get it up to about 13, maybe 14, and maybe down to 7 for some mold ripened cheeses like Camembert. So what I'm going to do is get that small bar fridge, make sure it's got the right racks in it that I can use, and connect it into the reptile thermometer. Put the probe inside the fridge, slip it through the seal. It shouldn't be too bad. It should get a fairly good seal anyway. Set it at 13 degrees and away it should go. It should turn the fridge on and off to get to that right temperature, and hopefully it shouldn't turn it on and off too often. So yeah, that should work. So stay tuned for a blog post about that, and maybe I'll talk about it in the next podcast episode. So now, if your cheese making endeavours outgrow a small bar fridge, then you can launch into the full kitchen fridge mode and connect an external thermometer to that. That'll work just as well. Probably save a little bit of money as well if you've got a second fridge at home that you're not using. So you can certainly use that. Now just remember that you need to monitor the temperature and the relative humidity with a hygrometer separately from what you see on whatever external thermometer that you're using, because you really do have to double check, because some of the readings on those external thermometers are not 100% accurate. So just make sure. I've got a little, it's made by Honeywell. It gives you the temperature and the relative humidity, and I just stick that in the wine fridge. That's how I could tell the wine fridge was drifting out of temperature when it got hotter. So there's some of the ways where you can age your cheese at home. Don't forget, if you want to raise the humidity, just put a bowl of water in the bottom of the fridge. Now, if you're going to store cheeses in your fridge, just to avoid contamination, if it's a harder cheese, cheddars and above, then I highly recommend either waxing them, and you can reuse the wax after you finish with the cheese. Just give it a quick clean and some soapy water and rinse it off with cold water. Or you can vacuum pack. Now, vacuum packing, you can actually clean the plastic out as well and reuse that if you need to as well. Look, it depends on the type of cheese, whether you use waxing or vacuum packing. The harder the cheese, the easier it is to wax. And I've found that, for instance, I've been making a fair bit of Cotswold lately, and it's a very moist cheese, so I vac pack that, and I don't have too many problems, whereas I waxed that before and a lot of moisture collected under the wax, because it's a very moist cheese. So you've got to pick your cheeses. So cheeses like Parmesan, if you're making a small wheel of Parmesan, it's better if you wax it because it tends to breathe. You got to remember, Parmesans mature for over 12 months, so you want something that can breathe. The wax allows the cheese to breathe, whereas vac packing doesn't. Now, if you're going to mature mold ripened cheeses in your cheese fridge, or however you're going to do that, or in your basement, make sure you put them into a maturation box, and it's just simply a plastic box, food grade plastic box with a raised bottom that the cheese won't be swimming around in any excess way that it falls out of. Then you can pick those up at a supermarket. They're no issue at all. Maturation boxes are quite easy to find, even if you find some sort of food storage box with a raised bottom. Usually it's just a plastic insert. Now, that also protects your other cheeses from getting contaminated with molds as well. So it serves two purposes. Increases the humidity, because mold ripened cheeses need humidity around about 90% humidity. So maturation box does that, no problems at all. Now, if you're going to go the naked version of cheese when you're maturing it, just make you're able to increase the humidity artificially within your cheese fridge, then to stop it from drying out and to stop any molds growing on your cheese, just wipe it with a brine solution. Wipe it with a cloth that has been dipped in a brine solution, and just wipe that all over the cheese, and that'll get the molds off anyway, so no problems at all. Anyway, so that's maturation. Let's get on with the news. So the news today is from Switzerland. Now, Switzerland's a long way away from Australia, but this is from the French region of the French-speaking region of Switzerland. Sorry, all you Swiss people out there. So this is it's from the New York Times. It's in Transit Blogs. It's the title's called Making Tracks for Cheese. Goes on to say, first chocolate, now cheese. Golden Pass of Switzerland has introduced a cheese train as a winter counterpart to its summer chocolate route. The excursion offers travellers the opportunity to experience the culinary traditions of the Pays d'Yonne region. The trip begins at Montreux, where passengers receive a sample of organic cheese from Le Chalet restaurant, along with regional white wine. After a brief ride through the alpine landscape, guests head to Le Chalet in Chateau d'Ay, known for its in-house dairy. The traditional dressed cheesemaker demonstrates the alpine cheesemaking process, from how raw milk is heated in a copper cauldron over a wood fire to how curdled cheese is placed into a mould. Travellers can enjoy the specialty hard cheese along with fondue. Lunch can be purchased for additional charge. The 36-passenger vintage Pullman carriage from the 1930s with wood-panelled ceilings, velour upholstery and soft carpet is reserved for those who purchase tickets for the cheese train. The journey through Lake Geneva region passes vineyards and offers a spectacular view of countryside with its traditional Swiss chalets. Doreen Colley, the cheese train project manager at Golden Pass, said in a telephone interview. Now, it's not cheap. It's a weekend affair. Rates begin at 49 Swiss francs for children and 79 Swiss francs for adults, and include the round-trip transportation between Montreux and Chateau d'Ay, as well as admission to a folk art museum in Chateau d'Ay, which is known for its scissor-cut silhouettes or decoupages. So that's interesting. So if you're ever in Switzerland, in the Pays d'Yonne region, then go to Chateau d'Ay and catch the train. That'll be very interesting. I'd love to. It looks like a lovely electric train that goes up into the Alpine region. So I'll put that in the show notes for everybody to have a look at. So now it's time for listener questions. And listener questions today, we do have one from Jean-Michel, but we'll skip over his and we'll play his second. The first one I've got is from a lady called Joanne Sullivan. So let me just pull that up.
Greetings, Gavin. It's Joanne Sullivan from Manitoba, Canada. I contacted you one time about the Parmesan that I'd created from your recipe that had cracked. Perhaps you remember me. I am re-listening to all your podcasts because I'm just going into full cheese mode. Here in Manitoba, Canada, it's blustery in winter, and this is when I have time and peace to focus on making my cheeses. So I'm reviewing all of my bookmarks and listening to all of your podcasts and reviewing things, looking at my books, etc. And I just got my new fresh supply of rennet and cultures and everything from New England cheese making, so I'm excited. So I have a few questions. First and foremost, I have a question about stirring. The last couple of times that I've made cheese curds, I've actually stirred with my hand, and then I used a wooden spoon. I have a hard time gently stirring with my metal stainless steel slotted ladle, which is basically flat with ever so slightly a bit of a scoop, which is what I've seen used often. And the reason is because I feel like I'm cutting my curds too much when I'm stirring it, even though I try to do it gently. So my question is number one, have you ever stirred with your hands? I'm a very tactile person, so feeling those curds and how they're going makes a bit more sense to me, although sometimes it can get too hot for my hands. And secondly, what do you use for stirring that doesn't damage and break the curds? So that's one of the questions that I have. I'm curious about the stirring. The curd cutting, I noticed the curd cutter that you have there, and I'm very excited to see that it's made by a cheese cutting buddy of yours from Manitoba, Canada. If at all possible, I would so love to be put in touch with this particular gentleman, since there are so few cheesemakers in Manitoba, and we all need to, support each other. And I also run a Facebook page, Cheesemakers and Connoisseurs of Manitoba, and we would like to include him in there since we only have a few members. In any case, I do have other questions, but I will leave this one at this. Curious about the stirring and not desecrating curds and not cutting them too finely, and also to get to know if I could perhaps be put in touch with Mr. David from Manitoba, Canada, that created your cheese curd cutter. I will leave my contact info, and I will also send you another message or two since I have more questions too. You're so helpful. Thank you very much. I will hopefully hear from you and talk to you again soon. Bye for now.
Well, thanks very much, Joanne. Appreciate the questions. The first one around stirring. Well, I actually do use a metal spoon when I first stir the curds. Now, I find that when I've cut the curds with the curd cutter or with a curd knife, I allow the curds to rest for about 5 minutes. And what I find that does is it actually heals the curd cubes that I create. So therefore, when I'm stirring it with the metal spoon, it actually doesn't cut the curds unless I specifically on purpose, if I find a big chunk that I want to cut in half, then I'll use the side of the stainless steel spoon. So I don't really have too many problems with it. Now, I've never stirred the curds by hand. I've never found the need for it because I think that once you let the curds heal, then you don't have any problems with the spoon. However, if I'm going to make a curd that's really fine and I can't get that fineness with the curd cutter or with a curd knife, what I do is I use a balloon whisk. So for cheeses like Emmental or any Swiss type cheese where the curd grain is very fine, Gruyere, Parmesan and Romano, those 4 types of cheeses, I use a balloon whisk. And I find that, sure, when you do stir, it does, certainly I cut the curd with the balloon whisk because I can get it a lot finer, the grain's a lot finer. And when I'm stirring, if I find any big pieces, then I can cut that with one of the wires on the balloon whisk. So that helps make the curds a lot smaller when I need it. So like I mentioned, let the curds heal and you won't have too many problems. Sure, you can stir with your hands. I've seen videos of traditional cheesemakers in Europe use their hands. I think even in the halloumi video where I discovered how to make halloumi, the 2 old ladies used their hands to stir the curds. So there was certainly no special equipment used there. Now, on to your second question. The guy's name in Manitoba is David Dawson. So, David, if you're listening, please just shoot me an email, and I know you will because you always listen. Shoot me an email and I will exchange Joanne's email address if you so desire. So that'll sort that out. So thanks again, Joanne, for your question. So I do have another voicemail, and this one is from Jean-Michel. So let me just bring that up.
Hello, Gavin. This is your Frenchman again. And I've got a couple of questions to ask you. The first is about Stilton blue cheese aging. I've made a couple of Stilton over the last months, and the first was aged for 3 months, and it was really hard. And I reduced the aging time until I found the better taste, not only for my taste but also for my friend taste, including an Englishman who's used to this cheese, and it was perfect at 1 month and a half. So is there a difference in aging speed according to condition, or I don't know what? You have to know that I followed your recipe step by step, and that I'm aging the Stilton in a cheese cave at 11 degrees. So maybe I don't know why Stilton is aging so quickly. The second question is about calcium chloride dilution. I bought some crystal calcium chloride, because I couldn't find any liquid one in France. I don't know why. And so I'm wondering how much I must put, how much crystal must I put in a given volume of water. If you know that, please tell me, because I'm in the dark as for this question. Usually I don't use any calcium chloride because I'm using this famous filtered, microfiltered milk that is saving calcium. But sometimes it's difficult for me to find some in Sundays, the day I usually make cheese. So I'll ask you my other question another day. Thank you very much for your future reply and for your blog and everything. Bye.
Well, thanks very much for your question, Jean-Michel. A pleasure as always. Now, your question was around Stilton and probably why it dried out so quickly. Well, with Stilton, if you're going to store that in your cheese fridge, you really have to use a maturation box. So a sealed plastic container that will keep the humidity high, then it won't dry out. You can't keep it on a rack in the cheese cave unless you can artificially inflate the relative humidity to around 90%. So if you can do that, that's fantastic. But the only problem with that is the blue mold, the Penicillium roqueforti, will infect all other cheeses in the cheese cave, whether you like it or not. So it's best to put your Stilton into a maturation box. So that can be a plastic box with a lid that's sealed, and it has to have a raised bottom. So if you keep it in your normal cheese fridge, it will mature a lot faster because it'll dry out a lot faster. And you want a slow mature, so keep it in a maturation box. That's the only suggestion I can think of for that. Now, as for your calcium chloride question, how much do you dilute the crystals? Well, I did a bit of research and I found, because I've never used crystals before, but they must use them to sell you the liquid version anyway. So to make a 30% solution, I found some measurements on cheeseforum.org. So you take 90 grams of the calcium chloride crystals and add that to 210 grams of distilled water. And you dissolve that. You can either boil it, and that'll dissolve the crystals a lot easier. It should be clear if there are no additives to the crystals. So if it's cloudy, there are some impurities, so you may have to filter that through coffee filter paper, and that may clear it up a little bit. But that'll give you a 30% solution. So once again, 90 grams of crystals to 210 grams of distilled water. So that'll give you a total of 300 grams, so that makes the 90, makes it a 30% solution. So don't forget to use distilled water because that will have no impurities in it whatsoever. So because it is water, that means that the 310 grams is actually 310 milliliters as well. So I hope that helps out, mate. I did see a few comments that you left on the blog. Thanks very much for that. I always love comments on the blog posts themselves, as well as questions via the voicemail or via email. Now, I've got a couple more via email. We're not running over time, so that should be good. So the first one is from Jay Leshark. I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, Jay, if I've mucked that up. He writes, Hi, Gavin. I'm looking to start making goat's cheese. However, I have a few small issues and questions that you may be able to help me with. I will keep them short and to the point. I live in Phuket, Thailand, so the environment is tropical. Nice for the beach, but it is not so good for cheese making. Any tips on making cheese in the tropics? I've listened to all your great podcasts and watched a few of your videos, but not seen or heard anything about goat's cheese, any tips or help. I have a goat farm near where I live, so I can source raw milk, which is great, as goat's cheese here in Phuket is super expensive. Thanks so much, and love what you're doing and how you have helped so many people. Best wishes, Jay. Okay, so Jay, until recently I didn't have any experience in making cheese in hot conditions, but I got some suggestions. For hotter climates, it's probably best to stick to quick, soft cheeses, like a Sherv, which is a soft goat's cheese. Mozzarella you can make with goat's milk. Feta you can definitely make with goat's milk. Or even halloumi. So you can make all those 4 cheeses with goat's milk, no problems at all. And they're soft cheeses and nice and quick. Now, not only will you be able to make those with goat's milk, but they're better suited to your climate because they don't need to be air dried. Because if you need to air dry something or have it pressed for a long time, in those really high humidity, in that high humidity, you'll attract wild molds galore. So all sorts of wild molds will infect your cheese while it's drying, and that'll wreck the final product. So, and also another note that running a cheese fridge would be prohibitive because it would cost a lot in electricity. It'd be running all the time to maintain that low temperature. So try those soft cheeses first, see how you go. I think you'll have a lot of success. I wish you every luck in your cheese-making endeavours. So the next question, or it's more of a comment, it's from Cole from Gunnedah. And Cole's just pointed back. He asked me a question a while ago about overcooking a curd on a cheddar and using the wrong culture. So he just comments here. Says, just as a point of interest, there was that question over on the overcooked curd on the cheddar. You said to mould it and wait and see and not give it to the dogs. Well, it's a nice cheddar, just cut more like a vintage and was a bit crumbly, but its flavour was more of an aged cheese. So the one where I used the wrong culture by mistake is also the same. Both are good flavoured cheeses. So at what point do you chuck them out? Well, Cole, I don't think I've ever chucked out a cheese. I chucked out one because it was just so overpowering. I had actually matured it at too high a temperature, so the culture had really bitten into the lactose and created so much lactic acid that it tasted foul. That was the only time I've really mucked up a cheese. So really, if you make a few simple mistakes within cheese making, keep the final product, mature it for a few months out, give it a try, and I guarantee that it will be edible. As long as you follow good sanitation and you keep the cheese at the right temperature when you mature it, really, you rarely chuck out a cheese because you could have some sort of fabulous creation that nobody else has ever made before. And yeah, it's just a serendipitous event. So rarely would I chuck out a cheese, to answer your question. And thanks for sending it in. Now, I do have another one. This one is from Michael Herod. Michael says, hello, I'm emailing you from Nashville, Tennessee, USA. I have seen a few of your YouTube videos, which are very helpful and informative. I got a Millie's fromage kit for Christmas and will be making some feta soon. I want to make cheddar, Sherv, and maybe a couple of other types. With my wife's input, she likes brie. Can you suggest a basic ingredients / equipment list? Thermophilic and mesophilic powders, etc., etc. Can I buy perishable ingredients from you? Thank you so much for your time, Chef Michael Herod. Well, thank you, Michael, for your email. Look, you can buy cheese making kits. Have a look at, there's some pretty good ones at, you're in the US. So, New England Cheese Making Company do kits. So they do soft cheese making kits, hard cheese making kits, Italian making kits, and they come with all the equipment. And they actually do a fair good bundle. Now, I'm not trying to push one company over another, but that's the one I know of because they actually interviewed me for their cheese-making blog. There are others out there. I think thecheesemaker.com is another company. I think they do some mail order from Wisconsin. which is probably not far away from Tennessee as far as the crow flies. You can't buy perishables for me because I can't ship overseas because the cultures would go off. So, get a decent range of cultures, some basic ones. The kits come with everything, and you can also get top-up ingredients. So try that. Try soft cheeses first. Now, I know you've got a kit to make feta, so that should turn out okay. But try some of the soft cheeses, some of the easy ones first, and then branch out, get a hard cheese making kit. Don't forget to get either a cheese making press, or you can make your own. I've got some designs on the Little Green Cheese blog, so have a look at that. And thanks again for your question. Hope that answered. Hope that helped out, Michael. Well, that's all we got time for this episode. All my cheese making recipes can be found at littlegreencheese.com or within my cheese making ebook, Keep Calm and Make Cheese, The Beginner's Guide to Cheese Making at Home. Now, that's available in all ebook formats for all ebook readers. Further details can be found on the cheese ebook tab of littlegreencheese.com. You can also find all my workshop dates. You can find all my YouTube video tutorials on my YouTube channel, which is Greening of Gavin. There are about 14 or 15 videos by now. So thanks for listening, curd nerds, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Little Green Cheese Podcast. During this podcast, you heard royalty-free music by Kevin MacLeod. I played Malt Shop Bop, News Theme, and Call to the Dairy Cows.